Kind of the rule, same in the modern military, back in the 18th century, it was no more than 3 days growth. So everyone had, did shave every 3 days or so.
I'd have to shave.
Yeah, yeah. So you got some of the basic stuff. You have your clothing, so you have an extra shirt, you have extra stockings. Hygiene was prevalent. It wasn't just dirty, gross. I mean, we were dirty and gross, but not dirty, on purpose. So we had soap, we had razors we shaved, we had some combs to comb our hair. Hair was long at the time,
so there was no regulation around that.
No, it was had to be long. So like some of the guys.
I saw the picture of her.
So a lot of what soldiers do is not actually shoot. A lot of what they do is dig and cut and dig and fill in stuff. So that kind of knife would be very useful in cutting down branches to create fashionings, which are bundles of sticks that you can then use for other stuff.
Okay. So one person would be carrying the kettle, and that's how we cooked all our food. And they would line up with our
here waiting to eat.
with our bowl, or if we didn't have bowls, we would have all just ate out of the kettle. So, this is pipe clay, or this is like pipe clay, and you can use this to make your white things white. So like your leather, you can rub it on there, get it wet, and it kind of whitens your leather.
Sort of helps
There's
clean it
also
up.
a similar version that's called black ball, which was a black ball, and it makes your black things black. So keeping your shoes, your leather, your cartridge pouch, all that kind of stuff, you'd always be shining that. You'd also have something similar to this. This is used for rolling paper cartridges, but you'd have a wooden dowel wrapped in buff leather, just like this, and it would have been tacked to this, and you would have something called brick dust, which is essentially just ground up brick, and you would use that as kind of a crude sandpaper, and that's what you use to get your rust off, any corrosion off your metal, shine your equipment. You would also have an oiler. I didn't bring that with me, but you have your oiler
For leather?
for your metal, that kind of stuff.
Oh, okay.
So these right here, these are essentially like ice cleats, ice spikes. You'd strap these on in the winter time. These shoes, if you see them, they're very, very, very smooth leather, not a lot of grip. So you put these ice creepers on, you'd strap them on. Yep, strap them on, and they would go on. And you'd be able to hopefully walk a little better on ice and snow.
Yeah. All these little things that.
All these little knickknacks. This is a trivet. This is essentially what this was a barrel band off a barrel, and I just wound it up, and it'd make something that you could put over the fire or the coals, and then you put your pot on. What they were finding in the archaeological digs and stuff at different camps or forts throughout the history, they would either find these, or they would either find the kettles with the bottoms rusted out, burnt out. Soldiers were, not all the time that they want a boiled, porridge or stew. They would sometimes try to, grill meat on there, and they were just burning out the bottom with their kettles. So if they did want to broil something, they can boil it straight on that. They can use the lid off the kettle. They can use that as kind of like a skillet, if you will, and cook off that.
Wow.
Then. Yeah, so I mean, besides that, kind of just it wasn't all work, recreation. You had your pipe, your tobacco, cards, gambling.
And was this like for them to write?
As a sergeant, that's what I'm using to keep track of who's here.
Oh, okay.
So I'll do a roll in the morning or in the evening, and sometimes in the evening, and I'll see who's present and
But like where you are?
Yeah, and it'll just be used for company records. Like we have so and so people here, and then we can use that to report, because it's all. Even at that time, it was rather a big bureaucracy of like, we need supplies for so many men. Well, you have this many men there.
Right.
We're not sending supplies for men you don't have.
Or if someone died, right?
Yeah.
Spread the news and.
Or we're like reporting, I have this many men fit, and I have this many men sick in hospital.
Cool.
And that's also used for pay and.
Right.
So you kind of it was heavy, so it's wool upon wool with linen. And then they would have had that wool waistcoat underneath that over a linen shirt. My linen shirt is not a t-shirt; it's a it's a gown essentially. It's really long, so it's all bumped up in there. And we wouldn't have worn these roundhouse. They would have had a leather helmet like this. So this is a light infantry helmet, just straight leather. And it was the only really kind of protective quality of it was these rings and chains. So light infantry. Hello. Contrary to what you would see like in the movies, in Patriot, for example, you see everyone lined up, all right dress. Light infantry, we didn't fight that way. We fought more scattering, more like skirmisher tactics. We fought in pairs, and our pairs were spread out. So we wore these leather helmets to prevent us from. Yeah, we were just passing. The biggest threat to us as like little individual groups, or it'd be a cavalry charge coming down, seeing our small groups and just picking us up. So what we did is they put these chains on their helmet. In theory, I'm not sure how it was in practice, but in theory, they would provide protection against saber slashes. So if the cavalryman come by and slash it with a saber, it would hopefully hit the chain and glide off.
Wouldn't save you from a bullet.
Wouldn't save nothing. Nothing we have is going to be bullet. Nothing. So this would mean. If you're looking at like the America and the colonies during the Revolutionary War, cavalry action wasn't a big threat like it was in the year.
Cool. And unfortunately, my eyesight isn't as good as it used to be, so I have to wear the spectacles in order to help see what I'm doing. Some of the guys carry tomahawks. I prefer a fascine knife because I can cut down on something and I can cut sideways on something.
Send them. All right.
And it's always good to know what time it is so I can set my compass, and hopefully the sun is bright enough that it'll cast a shadow and I can see roughly what time of day it is.
8 to 10 degree microclimate if your uniform fits well. Really? And we do find that I was actually setting up this morning and in just shorts, and I was hotter and cooler now with the sun off my skin. Yeah. So it's a lot. If you'd like to feel how heavy this is.
I know, it just looks so heavy.
That's dry. Wool absorbs up to like 40% of its weight when it's wet. When it rains.
Can you imagine?
It gets.
Carry the guns. They look.
Yes, indeed. It gets. Got to put a little weight on that, otherwise the hook jumps off when you're not looking. So they're very well, and normally that would go over what I'm already wearing. And in the winter you get one extra layer as a vest, wool vest, so you just add a little bit extra warmth, and some wool gaiters to keep your legs warm.
That is so heavy. I believe it. And then,
And we don't have to play this with the drum.
And your shirt, by the way, is both your shirt and your undergarments and your nightie.
Yeah. But you would have to know.
For the ladies, yes, it would be a shift. Yeah.
So men would just skip it.
No, not so much.
We would just not do the drum.
This is one of my shirts.
by the time you have all the clothes on.
But definitely St. Thomas.
Oh.
You're done.
Right now, I am out of uniform. Not only because I'm lacking shoes, but because I've got my socks showing. You would have gaiters on.
Oh,
Bring me a gaiter, Glenn.
look at all the buttons.
Just display. There are 24 buttons on each leg.
Oh,
And no wonder they wanted to surprise people early in the morning when they were in the
Well,
battle.
it's because they start getting buttoned the night before. Actually, early in the morning is because it's hot during the day. And even with the marching in on campaign, you would pack camp, wake up early, 2, 3 in the morning, and be at your next camp by 9 in the morning before the heat of the day.
curious. Okay, so just listening to the British and they're showing their kits that they had and all of their supplies and so forth. So what did you guys have? What did you, when you were out on the battlefield?
In an ideal world,
right,
we would have had similar to what I have on.
Okay.
Which is, my buckled shoes and my gaiters and my short gaiters and my splatter dashers and then socks, whatever. The colonial troops certainly tended to be poorer than the British troops.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And so tougher to get uniforms, which is why, like, our regiment, 1st New Hampshire, there's a green coat there, but they had different colors.
Yeah, I saw the green coat too, yeah, okay.
During the war. Spent a lot of times with the brown coat. Really, that was because brown was easy to dye from captured wool, from the red wool from the British, to dye to brown.
Okay.
So, but essentially we would have the same, we'd have a cartridge box with pre-made cartridges like you see here, my haversack, and I've got a canteen, and
so what do you have in your haversack?
I've got all kinds of
Not
stuff.
today, but what would you?
I mean,
what would you have had?
You would have your rations, if you were marching, you have some foodstuffs in there, your rations, some of the basic tools and cleaning stuff for your musket. Probably have a backpack on too if you were on the march. You'd have a backpack with a blanket, ideally, for sleeping, that sort of thing.
All right.
That pretty much would be it. If you were lucky, because some of this stuff you see is really not practical to have on real life march.
Sure.
So you'd have stuff in a baggage train.
So for supplies, like for food, for your rations and so forth, so they're on a train, on a baggage train following the company, or are you going to local farms, or
both?
Okay.
The troops ideally didn't, they would want to pay for things, but got to the point at some points during the war they were so poor that they'd have to go and commandeer some things, but it would, hopefully you'd have some rations provided, but you'd have to live off the land partially too. So, it could get really dicey at times, especially when everybody hears about Valley Forge and trying to get Washington writing, trying to get Congress to get the food and the supplies they needed and whatever. They eventually had to go out and start getting what they could from the local farms and land area.
What is the two
that's just
on your hat?
That's just for the thread. This is called a cockade. It's really just a decoration. These two don't serve anything other than it's how the hat is tied up.
Oh.
This is called, back then it would have been called a cocked hat.
Yeah.
But this is cocked. It's not a tricorn. If you think, this is called a bicorn, as opposed, because it's pulled up in the front, high in the back, as opposed to 3 equal sides. So this is the military cocked style. Okay. Next week we're doing a Bunker Hill thing, which is early war militia clothing. I will have a true tricorn. But again, back then it was just referred to as a cocked hat. But that's just because in theory I could take the, if it's really hot and we're on the march, I could take these out and lay the flaps completely down to protect myself from the sun. So and again, the way this is, it's not straight, the way I have it, if you notice, by regulation, it's supposed to be cocked over that point over my left eye. And that's because it makes carrying the musket easier, so I'm not constantly hitting it with my hat when I take my hat off.
It's not a fashion statement.
No, it's a practical statement, yes. So, yeah.
Great, thanks.
Oh,
So what,
right at the moment, pretty well.
Yeah, I feel like being president.
Well, when I'm with my people, if you will, I feel very good.
Good. And the soldiers?
The soldiers and I have been together since New Jersey, off and on. So, the New Hampshire, 1st New Hampshire is my home, if you will, home away from home.
Let's see. Well, actually, I'm glad to be back. I've done it a couple of times before here, and I enjoy doing it and teaching people, about the Black Mariners and what they did and what they stood for. Because a lot of people don't even know they had Black Mariners. So, and it was freedmen and enslaved people that were actually Black Mariners. So, it was both, and it wasn't unusual for somebody to be enslaved to actually be in charge of you if he's done it longer than you, because he knows the ropes and everything and how things work. So you might find a slave being boss actually telling you how to do what to do and show you those ropes. So of course Jack Stins was born free, so he wasn't a slave.
Yeah.
It's made out of tea. Isn't that crazy? So that's black tea. That's the kind of tea that people were using back then. But they actually use the loose tea like this. They only use blocks of tea like this most of the time in China and other Asian countries. This wasn't thought of as being quite as good as the like this. But it's kind of interesting just to take a look at to know that there's different types of tea that are out there. So that is kind of what the Boston Tea Party was. And we know that in response, like I said, people came up with all these great different substitutes for tea. Has anyone ever seen sumac bushes around? So they grow all over around here. And actually, is that sumac growing over there in the corner? Yeah. So you'll see it in the summertime, like August and the beginning of September. They have long kind of like cones of red. That is something that was used to make tea. And so different areas across the country use different local herbs to make tea and try to simulate the tea. We have one account from the 18th century that says, in regards to raspberry leaf, which I think we have raspberry leaf somewhere right there, yeah. That, quote, it was as good as any other tea and much more wholesome. So that's another thing they started to do. People that lived here in the colony started to say, you know what, we really need to get people to make their own tea more and stop buying the British tea. We can't have this. So they started making up things about British tea. And they started talking about the black tea and talking about how they thought it could cause health issues and that it was dirty and grimy, and it was kind of like this whole, like, before social media, it was this word of mouth media attack on black tea from China and how Liberty tea or tea from local herbs was the way to go, not only for patriotic reasons but for health reasons. And what's really interesting too, did I lose my paper? I don't know. That John Adams wrote in his diary about the Boston Tea Party. He said, last night 3 cargoes of both Boohee tea, which is like the black tea that was most common, were emptied into the sea. This is the most magnificent movement of all. There is a dignity, a majesty, a sublimity in this last effort of the Patriots that I greatly admire. So this idea of protesting and getting together as a group, even before America was a country, is part of something that's ingrained in our society. So if you would like to take some selfies with our no tea for me signs or no tax on tea signs, you can, as a form of alternative protest that the colonists could have done that would be peaceful assembly, which was then later codified or made rule in our Constitution that we now have as a freedom. I have a little book here about our constitutional freedoms as well. And you're welcome, if you haven't already, made your own Liberty tea. And if you haven't had a chance to feel the brick tea, just because it's something different. And a lot of times, like I said, people kind of think that's what people used back then, but it really wasn't that common here in the colonies. You can take a feel of that. And if you have any additional questions, let me know. And this lovely lady here is a food historian, and she knows a lot about tea and all of the etiquette and things that go along with drinking tea, because it was a big part of our culture back then. Just kind of like tea, coffee is like the thing right now. Tea was the thing back then. So I'm going to let Melissa share a little bit more about that, and then you can go visit her down below as she's cooking all kinds of yummy foods down by the open fire that you might have with your tea meal.
So yes, tea was a very, very important part of culture, of our society in the colonial times. It was something that if you were really, really rich or really, really poor, all of those people could have tea in some form. It was typically loose leaf, black tea or green tea that was popular here. Boohee, which is actually a mispronunciation of Wooyi tea, which is what I'll be brewing down at the fire pit, is a tea that is grown in the Wooyi mountains of the Fujian province in China. Being imported, it along with Kongi were the 2 most popular blacks, and then Lapsang Souchong, which is a very smoky tea. Thomas Jefferson and Washington both preferred a Hai Sun, which is a green tea. Drinking tea in the colonial time period there was a lot of pomp and circumstance, for lack of a better term, around it. There was this entire etiquette of how to drink tea, how to serve tea. Most of you, I'm sure, have seen the teacups like this, right? This is not what teacups in colonial America looked like. Does she? They're really pretty, aren't they? So if you guys would like to come down to the fire pit, here in about 5 or 10 minutes, I'll give people time to get down there. I've got original teacups from the very early 1800s. They look very similar to what the colonial ones did. So I've got teacup, tea bowl, and tea plate, and I'm going to be brewing up some tea. I also have a wonderful publication from the New Hampshire Gazette. It was published about 3 weeks after the Boston Tea Party by the Matrons of Liberty. Obviously the Tea Party itself was done by the Sons of Liberty. This was a publication from the Matrons of Liberty on how terrible this was and how abusive the lack of tea was to women. It's a fantastic read. I'll talk a little bit about it. Does anybody have any questions before we head down there?
How did you make
The chamomile? So it's the flowers. You would gather them, dry them, and then you just steep them in water. It makes actually a very honey flavored liquor. We call we call them Liberty teas, but they're not actually a tea. They are called tisanes, which is, there's some conjecture that it comes from tea, from the French tea, and sans, meaning none, so it's tea without tea. But that's what an herbal tea is called. One of the ones that is not here that was incredibly popular is something called New Jersey tea. And it's actually a native perennial shrub that we grow. The leaves are picked like tea, it's dried like tea, and there are accounts of people who have drank it who said that it tastes just like black tea. Whether that's true or not, I think it's up to the individual palate. The tea that they drank in the colonial times was a little bit aged for our liking. It was generally about 3 years old because the East India Company had this backlog of it that they were trying to sell for the cheap. So it was probably not what we would enjoy drinking today, but then they really enjoyed it. That's not to say that you could not still drink tea. We do have, during the Revolutionary War, we had something called privateers. Is anybody familiar with what a privateer is? It's a government-sanctioned pirate. So, kind of like something we could relate to now. Have you guys heard when the whole Russian-Ukraine war started, how the government said that if you captured a Russian yacht, you could keep it? It's kind of the same thing that they were saying in the colonial times. If a colonial vessel captured a British vessel, they could keep everything on it. So we have lots of reports of all of the cargo vessels being brought in and all of the content sold. And a lot of that did have tea. Yes. Ships. There's a lot of different types of ships, but yes, a vessel is just, in this instance, referring to a ship. That's a great question. So you still could have tea, but more and more it's considered unpatriotic. So they're starting to shift more towards the herbals as well as coffee. And hot chocolate. Chocolate was another thing, which incidentally was considered a nutritional breakfast drink. I personally think we should bring that back. Yes. Anything else before we head down? Yeah. They did have, so the militia would typically have tin cups. They're lightweight. If you can imagine having to put this in a backpack type thing to travel along with all of your pots and pans, and it would get broken and you would have nothing to drink your tea in. So yes, more often they are not doing much of a tea ceremony as much as they're just drinking out of whatever vessel they got. And in this case, I mean a drinking cup.
And you will notice they are triangular. Triangles are no longer allowed. According to the Geneva Convention, these wounds from triangular blades are nearly impossible to stitch clothes together. They just don't. So Geneva Convention's like, all right, you know what? Just no. No more triangles. This even has a groove in it. If you stick it into something, a pumpkin, a horse, or a human, it is going to have suction. You won't be able to get it back out again. The groove allows air to get it back out.
An ice cream, like 2 minutes later.
Nothing but practical. It's mildly. You're constantly cleaning. This is a 69. The British use 72 calibers. That's pretty much throwing a jawbreaker at you.
Probably.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, I could just throw a gumball at you and it would hurt. Now let's put 110 grains of explosive behind it. They go a lot faster. We can put holes in telephone poles at 50 yards without a problem. On camera here, how do you think we hunted? These guys over here that have actually taken down deer with them. Like I said, I can put a hole in a telephone pole. Telephone poles are skinnier than deer. The reason that they were inaccurate in warfare was because I was saying before, right? When you load a smaller ball, it's dirt inside. If it's smaller than 4.
You're doing great with your questions.
Yes.
First 5,000 are rough.
And it amazes me that you can talk and just keep doing it.
You give the sheep a haircut, you wash it, and then you comb it. You get all the little hairs in order, and then you have to put some twist into it and a little tension on it.
With the right tool and the right technique, it can be easy. It is a little bit. Logwood, the bark of the logwood is used to make this purple dye in.
Besides your clothing, you have all your kind of personal items. Some of it was recreational, so you have your playing cards, your pipe tobacco. If you had dice, you played dice, but that was kind of the limit of entertainment in the camp at the time. You had carried your hygiene equipment, so you have your soap, you have like a rag to wash with, you have your combs to comb your hair. Now, if you wouldn't have had short hair, soldiers back then had long hair, they would have been braided up and tied up. So my hair is very, very...
So they would put it into a pot full of water with onions, salt, pepper, and their vegetables. And then once they got it up to a nice boil, they would throw in their rice or their beans or whatever starchy food that the Army had issued them. So today we're having onion and celery and rice stew with beef.
So did they get starchy food because they knew like that would fill them up more, or that would?
It was easier to keep.
Okay. So was it all based on preserve, like how preservable it was?
For the things that were being shipped from England, absolutely. You got barrels, like 50-gallon barrels of beef and pork. They would just literally chop it off the cow and throw it in the barrel, bone and all, and then dump in brine. And the brine was a preservative. So you ended up with meat the consistency of corned beef, but without the peppercorns. And they pull some of that slimy green beef out of the barrel and give it to the soldiers. They'd hold up a piece. They'd say, "Who wants this?" An ambitious cook would say, "I'll take it." They'd throw it in his pot, and he goes back to his mess area to cook it. And then they held off on things like the green peas. Dried green peas were somewhat popular, but they take an awfully long time to cook, and they're bad on the soldiers' teeth because if they're not cooked well, they're crunchy. So they got about a pint of peas per man per week, and then they would supplement it with whatever they could forage in the community. As time went on, later the British would actually issue blocks of dried vegetables. They would actually take vegetables, cook them, compress them into a block, and dehydrate them, and you would just break off a piece of vegetable like they would break off a brick of tea from when they shipped the tea from China.
So how do they preserve like a block of tea?
A block of tea was dried and then put in a big press.
Then they'd stamp it.
And then they would
What
stamp
about the
it.
vegetables? That's something I'm
That's
curious
new.
about.
That's new information to me. I haven't heard that.
So the vegetables, they would basically do the same thing. They would cook them so they wouldn't rot, and then they would dehydrate them with heat and pressure, and then they would stamp them into a block and then sort of bake them to dry them out. That was later, like the 1850s, that the dried vegetables came in, and the cookbooks of the time actually say things like in 5 large kettles, brown 50 pounds of beef, 10 pounds of rice, and 1 block of dried vegetables per kettle.
Yeah. And so it would just be like the kettle?
Like a pack of ramen.
Alright.
The good ramen with the little veggie packets.
Nice. Very cool.
So, but in the Revolutionary War era, what they could count on was rice or beans, peas, beef or pork, and the army bread. And that was pretty much it. Onions and vegetables were things that were foraged or purchased in the community. The British Army was not supposed to liberate produce from the colonists because the colonists were British subjects. So anything they took, they were supposed to pay for.
Not for anything that serious.
So, but you could get like 10 pounds of potatoes for a copper penny. So it wasn't too much of a hardship.
Like that. Slow down. Okay. So now, let's see. All right. Curl it around and push down at the same time. There you go. All the way around until you come up against the next post. Keep going. Oh, right there is good. All right. So now, take it off, and this is what we got. Okay, you put that down. Okay, you got muscles?
I hope so.
There you go.
Hey, awesome. Well, thank you.
I put it before the fire and let it heat up. Once it's up to temperature, I put my bread in, I put the lid on, I set it over coals, and I put more hot coals on top. And what that's doing is I now have heat coming in from both sides, and that's exactly what your oven at home does. And it really does cook similarly in time to your modern oven at home. This bread will take about 35-45 minutes to bake. Is that what that is? That I would even go so far as to say I don't know that each man is issued 1 pound of bread, 1 pound of meat, because what they said was it is better for morale, for community, for our men to dine together. So you tend to see groups of about 6 men eating and cooking together. It's kind of like there's one fire pit to 6 men. And so to me, this is conjecture, but it would make more sense, especially when it comes to like butchering, because a lot of them are having cattle come with them and they're butchering as needed. So rather than chopping up this 800-900 pound hunk of beef into 1 pound sections, do it in 6 pound sections. The bread is a little bit different because you were issued 1 pound of flour or 1 pound of bread, which is different because 1 pound of flour will make a larger loaf than 1 pound. But it was an important distinction to make. So if it's already baked, they could have baked 6 pound loaves, but those are going to be massive loaves, and they would take forever to bake. So that I have a feeling it was baked in single pound loaves and distributed to men. It is also, there are plenty of accounts of men carrying the flour, which is really where the fire cakes come in, is because that's all they have is flour. They're mixing it with water, and they're cooking it either in the ashes or on the hot stone.
It could have been used.
So it's...
So the men are cooking.
Interesting idea.
Yes. There are some accounts of women, camp followers, who are cooking, but by and large, they're not doing that. They're doing things like laundry. Some of them are being hired to do that, and some of the wives, at least according to some of the reports I have read, it seems like they thought, these poor guys, I want to be useful. So it's not unheard of, but it was not the norm, at least according to the sources I've read, which is kind of interesting because in non-militia life, it is certainly the women who are doing it, and that is, they are the homemakers. So it's kind of interesting to think that these men who are either bachelors or have either had their wives or their mothers cooking for them their entire life, it's now, here you go, have some food. And I have read a couple of reports of guys talking about, we had one of our group members who volunteered to bake the bread, and we're not going to make that mistake again. That's got to be a bitter disappointment. So, yeah.
Bishop had to be
At how loud this instrument is. In fact, when I'm accompanying a single vocalist, I often have to cock the lid down because the volume will interfere with the singing. And when you're accompanied, your job is to make the other person sound good. So, let's see. hang by their damper felts and the string, and right next to that felt is a quill, a piece of carved goose quill.
The Medal with a Heart. General Washington wanted to do something special to thank his soldiers for all they had gone through to help free America. He couldn't give the soldiers money. He couldn't give the soldiers land. What could he do for his men? Finally, Washington had an idea. Up until now, only officers were given awards, so the general decided to create a special award for enlisted men who had performed exceptionally brave and honorable actions during the war. The award would be in the shape of a heart to show his men how he felt about them. It would be made from purple cloth, a color worn by kings. And across the front of the heart, the word merit was stitched, signifying the wearer had done something exceptional. The award was called the Badge of Military Merit.